Think of the Roman Empire. Who's the first face that comes to mind? For most people, it's this guy, Julius Caesar. His name is so iconic that Caesar and Kaiser and Tsar all became words for emperor. It seems obvious, right? He crossed the Rubicon, conquered Gaul, became dictator for life. Surely he was the first emperor. Well, what if I told you that? Technically, he wasn't. The story of Rome's first emperor is a lot more complex and fascinating than you might think. Stick around because we're about to unravel one of history's greatest political rebranding campaigns. So, if not Caesar, then who? The man who holds the title of the first Roman emperor is his own great-nephew and adopted son, a young man originally named Gaius Octavius, who we now know as Augustus. The journey from the fall of the Republic to the rise of the empire is the story of the transition between these two men. To understand why Augustus gets the credit, we need to look at what Caesar actually did, and more importantly, what he didn't do. Let's rewind to Caesar's time. Rome was a republic, and it had been for nearly 500 years. The very idea of a king, a rex, was deeply hated. The Romans had overthrown their last king centuries earlier, and were fiercely proud of their system of shared power, with elected consuls and a powerful senate. This fear of one-man rule was baked into their political DNA. When Caesar, after his incredible military victories, marched on Rome and eventually had himself declared Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, he wasn't creating a new system. He was using an old emergency republican office and twisting it into something permanent. This was a massive red flag for the Roman aristocracy. A dictator was supposed to be a temporary position, appointed to handle a crisis and then step down. By making it permanent, Caesar was basically saying, the crisis is me and it's never ending. He held all the real power, but he was still operating, at least on paper, within the crumbling framework of the Republic. He never called himself emperor. He never took the title of king. He minted coins with his face on them, which was a huge deal, but he didn't fundamentally dismantle the republican institutions. He just sat on top of them, controlling everything. And we all know how that ended for him. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, a group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators, assassinated him in the name of saving the Republic. They feared he was about to make himself a king. His death, however, didn't restore the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into another round of brutal civil wars. This is where our main character, the young Octavian, enters the stage. At just 18 years old, Octavian learned he was Caesar's adopted son and primary heir. This was a bombshell. He was a teenager with no political or military experience, yet he was suddenly thrust into the heart of Roman power politics. Everyone, including seasoned generals like Mark Antony, underestimated him. They saw him as just a boy, a name to be used and then discarded. But Octavian was brilliant, ruthless, and incredibly patient. He used his connection to the now deified Caesar to build a following and an army. He formed an alliance with Mark Antony and another general named Lepidus, known as the Second Triumvirate. Their stated goal was to hunt down Caesar's assassins, which they did. But really, it was a pact to carve up the Roman world between them. This alliance was never going to last. It was a partnership of ambitious predators, and eventually they turned on each other. After sidelining Lepidus, the final showdown was between Octavian in the west and Mark Antony, who had famously allied himself with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, in the east. Octavian was a master of propaganda. He painted Antony not as a Roman rival, but as a decadent, Eastern-influenced traitor who had abandoned Roman values for a foreign queen. He framed the coming war not as a civil war, which Romans hated, but as a war against a foreign enemy, Egypt. It was a genius move. In 31 BC, at the naval battle of Actium, Octavian's forces, led by his brilliant general Agrippa, decisively defeated the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled back to Egypt and a year later took their own lives, leaving Octavian as the undisputed master of the Roman world. Now here is the crucial difference between Octavian and his great uncle Caesar. The civil wars were over. Octavian had absolute power. He could have declared himself dictator for life or even king. But he had learned from Caesar's fatal mistake. He knew that Romans would never accept an open, declared monarchy. Brute force wasn't enough. You needed the illusion of legitimacy. So in 27 BC, in a masterful piece of political theatre, Octavian went before the Senate and announced that he was relinquishing all his emergency powers and restoring the Republic. He literally handed power back to the Senate and the people of Rome. The senators, many of whom owed their careers and even their lives to him, were shocked and probably terrified. They begged him to stay, to guide the state. After some staged reluctance, he graciously agreed. They showered him with honors and new titles. The most important of these was Augustus, which means the revered one or the illustrious one. It was a name with religious and moral authority, but no actual legal power. It was perfect. They also gave him the title Princeps, which translates to first citizen. He wasn't a king or a dictator. He was just the most important guy in the room, the first among equals. It was all a brilliant illusion. Behind the scenes, Augustus carefully retained all the real power. He kept command of the most important provinces, the ones with the largest armies. He held the power of a tribune, which allowed him to veto the Senate and propose laws. He was the commander-in-chief, the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, and the final court of appeal. He controlled the treasury and the grain supply. In effect, he held all the powers of a king, but they were all granted to him under republican-sounding titles, and for fixed terms, which were, of course, always renewed. He created the Principate, a system where the emperor, the princeps, ruled while maintaining the facade of the old republic. The Senate still met, consuls were still elected, and the old institutions continued to exist. But everyone knew who was really in charge. Augustus cleverly rebranded autocracy. He didn't tear the old house down. He just built a throne inside it and convinced everyone it was just a really important chair. This is why Augustus, not Caesar, is the first Roman emperor. Caesar tried to rule by breaking the system. Augustus succeeded by pretending to save it. Caesar's career was a short, violent flame that ended abruptly. Augustus's reign lasted over 40 years, a period of unprecedented peace and stability known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. He established a system of government that would last for centuries, and laid the foundation for the Roman Empire as we know it. He even established a clear line of succession, adopting his stepson Tiberius, ensuring the system would continue after his death. So while Julius Caesar was a pivotal figure who tore down the old republic, he was more like its final destroyer than the first emperor. It was his heir, the cunning and patient Augustus, who picked up the pieces and masterfully built something new in its place, all while convincing everyone he was just fixing the old thing. It's one of history's most successful and consequential political maneuvers. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think? Does Caesar's legacy make him a de facto emperor in your eyes? Or does Augustus's political genius earn him the title? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into Roman history, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more stories from the past. See you next time.